I know it's still pretty early in the year, but the Boston Celtics, to me, appear to be the championship favorite. Like, there are other teams certainly in contention. Obviously, you have to pay attention to Denver and to Milwaukee and Philadelphia and all these other teams, but the Boston Celtics look like the top tier contender, the number one team in the league to me right now in terms of championship status. And it's really interesting how they got there. Now, with the Celtics, of course, you can talk about the Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis trades from this offseason, and we're going to talk about those. But it's important to go even further back than that, because arguably, the most impactful move that they made was way before that. Arguably, this team is currently constructed with Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum on the same team wouldn't have existed without this move. When you go back to the year that the Celtics made the finals, about halfway through the year, not too long before the trade deadline, they were a pretty average team. They had started to win some games in a row, but they were still right around 500. And they made this trade that I honestly didn't understand at the time. And that was Derrick White. They brought in Derrick White. They gave up their first that year, protected future first, and some contracts. And I was like, okay, they definitely needed another guard, but I'm not really seeing what's happening here with the Derrick White situation. And he joins the team. They're the best team in the league by far in the second half of the year. They make the finals. They almost win the title. And if they don't make that Derrick White trade, there's no guarantee that the improvements that they had made prior to the trade, the handful of games prior to the trade, would have continued. And at that point in time, when they made the Derrick White trade, there were real conversations being had about the possibility of splitting up Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown and moving Jaylen Brown to a new team. He was going to need a new contract, and it just felt like that whole era had kind of run its course. And then like 4 months later, the Celtics were 2 wins away from winning the title. And that move sets up everything else that happened after it. And of course, in this offseason, they make some changes after a very weird postseason run last year. They move on from Marcus Smart, which feels like this foundational piece to this era of Celtics basketball. They move on from him. They bring in Kristaps Porzingis, and then shockingly have an opportunity to bring in Jrue Holiday. And this is where I'm at right now with Boston. If they're healthy, which is obviously a big if, because both Jrue Holiday as well as Kristaps Porzingis, Al Horford, a lot of the different pieces on the roster at times have had injury issues throughout their careers, especially recently. If they're healthy, if they're good to go, I don't really see a team that competes with them at full strength. Boston's A-plus game. Denver's close. A handful of other teams are close, but if they're making shots and they're playing well and they're healthy, that's the team. And obviously, part of the reason that they're there when they weren't like that last year is because of the moves they made, bringing in Jrue Holiday, bringing in Kristaps Porzingis, and they've both been unbelievably impactful. I mean, Porzingis' health is always going to be the issue and the concern for him, but the size that he provides them in the front court, along with the spacing ability, the defense, all that stuff is a perfect fit for the way the Celtics play, and he has gotten better. Like, one of the issues with KP towards the end of his tenure in New York when he was in Dallas was he was basically just a perimeter player. He never punished mismatches, and he got better at that in Washington, but one of the risks that Boston took when they traded for him was if that was going to continue, if his post-up improvement was going to continue. And he's been a really good post player this year, which is important for them because the only real way you can guard Boston is to switch everything because the amount of shots that they get up from the three-point line. And then all of a sudden you're left with Kristaps Porzingis in the middle of the floor against a smaller player, and he's been able to punish that. And then Jrue Holiday is the upgrade that they never should have been able to make. Like, Jrue Holiday is the guy that they never should have been able to bring in this offseason. The only reason it was possible was because Milwaukee made the relatively surprise move for Damian Lillard. And to me, that's something that could potentially shift the championship chase. Like, Milwaukee traded for Dame thinking it was going to improve their championship chances, and it might have actually helped Boston more than it helped Milwaukee. And basically the point of this video is 35 games through the season. Like, obviously there's still a long way to go and there's still a lot of things to be decided, but from a competitive standpoint, if Boston's right, if they're healthy, if they play their A-plus game, they're the number one team. And it's kind of close, but it's way further away than honestly I thought it would be coming into the year. And the thing that really sets them apart is there's a lot of like redundancy built into what their like A or A- game could look like, because there are plenty of games where Jaylen Brown just doesn't play well and he turns the ball over, he takes questionable shots, and they still find a way to win because they're just like, okay, well, today's going to be the Derrick White game then. Derrick White's going to get to run all the ball screen stuff and then we're going to score that way. If Derrick White's having an off game, or if he's not healthy, then okay, we're just going to post up Jayson Tatum. That's what they did against Detroit when they almost blew that game. They started the second half and they just posted up Tatum 6 possessions in a row and cut the lead from 18 or 19 or whatever down to 1 in like a span of 7 minutes. But if they're missing shots, that's obviously the concern for them, is they're so heavily reliant on the three-point shot that it introduces variance, which is how you end up down 19 against Detroit at halftime. It's also how you end up cutting that lead, so quickly and ending up winning that game. That's going to be the thing that people are going to continue to point to, is one, the coaching. It's still something that a lot of Celtics fans are concerned about in terms of timeout usage and all this stuff, although it's been a little better this year, not the timeout stuff, but the general coaching stuff. And then the reliance on the three-point shot. Those are the two limiting factors, in addition to injuries, to Boston's championship chances. But I firmly, truly believe that if they can kind of check all those boxes, it's their title to win. And the path that they took to get there really is incredible. I mean, it's so easy to see now why the Derrick White move made sense and why the Jrue Holiday and the Kristaps Porzingis moves made sense. But this is a team that 2.5 years ago was on the verge of collapse. They were in their first year with Ime Udoka as their head coach. There was a lot of stuff being said publicly around the team about how they weren't tough enough and all these different issues that were happening within the team. And I'm not kidding. I was making videos. I was talking about, Jaylen Brown to the Kings. Could they do this? Could they do that? And weirdly, you could kind of argue that they're almost better at times without Jaylen Brown and obviously the contract, but that's a whole different conversation. To get to where they are now is nothing short of incredible. And honestly, the number one thing that kind of separates them and differentiates them is all the other good teams around the league. There's a matchup thing that you could foresee them having issues with, right? Denver, obviously winning the title last year, they're going to get the benefit of the doubt the entire season, but sometimes they struggle with some of these quicker guards in the backcourt, as well as obviously Jokic isn't some kind of outstanding defender at the 5. So some of the ball screen combinations they can really struggle with. And against a certain matchup where teams shooting the ball really well, that can be a concern for them. Philadelphia is really, really good, but extremely, extremely reliant on Joel Embiid offensively. We saw that in the games in which he didn't play. They played well and scored well in some of them, but other times their offense just completely bogged down. That's a concern for them. Milwaukee, their perimeter defense is amongst the worst in the league right now. I'm not kidding. They don't have perimeter defenders on the roster. They don't. If they were in a playoff series tomorrow against Boston, I don't know who they would put on anybody to guard anybody. I know that they're waiting on some guys to come back and get healthy, but even fully healthy, I just don't see their perimeter defense being on the level that it needs to be. And then there's a handful of other teams around the league. Minnesota's really good, but all of these teams have issues with a certain kind of matchup because of the way their rosters are constructed. But Boston's the only team that I see that can play in all these different ways. They can play bigger, they can play smaller, they can prioritize three-point shooting, they can post you up. The only issue, I'm gonna be honest, we talked about injuries and coaching and all this other stuff. Let's just hypothetically say it's game 6 of the finals. They're up 3-2, they're at home, they're up 4 with 3 minutes left. Is that going to be a spot where someone like Jayson Tatum or Jaylen Brown delivers? They've been good at times in the postseason. They've had a ton of postseason success. But at some point, if you're going to win the title, you have to get to that top tier level. Your best player does, I should say. Jokic did it. Giannis did it. Steph, of course, has done it at times, as well as that whole team at times for Golden State. We need to see that from Tatum because as good as their roster is, as good as they are defensively, versatility, three-point shooting, all that stuff, that still is definitely a question mark. But for me, I know this has been kind of like a ranty video, but this is how I feel about Boston. As I just think about them and I think they almost feel inevitable as the representative in the Eastern Conference in the NBA Finals. And that's a really rare feeling to have about a team, before the halfway point of the season. Things could always change. Other teams could make moves at the deadline to kind of close the gap. Boston obviously could have issues during the season, but based strictly off the Derrick White trade, the Jrue Holiday trade, the Kristaps Porzingis trade, a relative overhaul of this roster around Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, I feel extremely confident about Boston's championship chances right now.